Welcome to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas annual memberships put Sound Ideas' full range of over 600,000 sound effects, music tracks, and production elements at your fingertips, with 3 tiers to choose from based on your sound design needs. The Creator's Access Plan is perfect for the independent creator working on a smaller scale, looking for high-quality sound options at a great price. With up to 100 downloads, you'll enjoy significant savings compared to buying individual sounds. And you'll have free reign over Sound Ideas' extensive collection. Use the promo code TONEBENDERS50 for 50% off any Sound Ideas annual membership to amplify your future productions. Hello, this is Tim. I've had a good week, everybody. As many of you know, I'm Canadian and I'm based in Toronto. This past week has been the Canadian Screen Awards. These are our version of the Oscars and the Emmys kind of rolled into one multi-day extravaganza. I, along with my sound team, were super excited to be double nominated in the Best Sound for Animation category. I think normally that means that you kind of split the vote and don't win, so I was super surprised when we won. I got to go up on stage and accept the award in front of quite a large audience. It was very nerve-wracking. I posted the speech on the Tonebenders Instagram account, and I want to thank everyone for all the kind comments and enthusiasm. I really appreciate it. If you're not following Tonebenders on Insta, please make an effort to do so. You'd be shocked at how much it can help the podcast grow. Okay, today's episode is a fun one. You may recall back in February, I went to LA and I was able to talk to the sound team working on Ballerina, the new John Wick world-based film. They were still working on it at that point, so I had not seen it yet, so we decided to pivot and make it about how the legacy of the John Wick franchise of films has changed the way action films sound since the first film's release back in 2014. Originally, we were all supposed to be together in one room for this talk, but if you are a regular listener and heard the story of my trip to LA featuring canceled flights and unexpected layovers, we had to postpone this talk by a day, which meant that it had to be partly in person and then 2 people joining us via video chat. So please forgive the sound quality as it switches between in-person and Zoom. Before we get to that, though, one final quick push about the free Back to the Future screening in Toronto on June 13th being put on by the Motion Picture Sound Editors. There will be a screening of the film, followed by one of the original sound editors on the film, Scott Hecker, talking about how they made the iconic sounds in the film. Then there will be a mixer at a pub across the street from the theater. It's going to be super fun. Go to the link in this episode's description to get your free tickets. Okay, let's talk about the legacy of sound in the John Wick films. Hey everybody, welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead, and I'm sitting in Formosa's Hollywood location in Studio 3 with the sound team that has been behind a decade plus of John Wick films. These are the men behind the biggest sounding action, gunfire, and punches maybe in film ever. These movies sound massive. Joining me today is Mark Stoeckinger, the supervising sound editor from John Wick 1 to 4. Mark has previously been on Tonebenders last year for an excellent talk about The Fall Guy. Make sure you go back and listen to it if you haven't heard it. I'm excited to be talking to him again. It's great to see you, Mark. Welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be back.
We also have a re-recording mixer that handled the music and dialogue on the John Wick films. It's Andy Koyama. Andy, this is your second time on Tonebenders. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And then we have Luke Gibleon, who is an apprentice sound editor on the first John Wick movie.
Yep.
And then you've been the supervising sound editor on the spin-off series, The Continental.
Yep.
You've been a sound designer and a sound editor. You've kind of gone up through the whole chain with this series. Someone referred to you as like the John Wick whisperer to me once, that you know all for the John Wick world.
It's been a wonderful world to be a part of. And yeah, it's basically been the trajectory of my career is in some way very much related to John Wick, including my life. Like I met my wife when my now wife when I was working on John Wick 1.
Something good to latch onto, a nice successful brand there. That's awesome. Finally, we have a first-time guest on Tonebenders, Casey Genton. Casey was the re-recording mixer on John Wick 4 and then is moving forward with Ballerina. I think, are you all moving forward with Ballerina? That's correct?
Yes.
Yeah. It's great to have you on, Casey. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. Mark, maybe you can take this one. What were your first conversations with the director, Chad Stahelski, like? This was, I believe, John Wick 1 was his first film ever directing after a long career as a stunt performer and stunt coordinator. So I'm assuming he didn't have a lot of experience with the whole workflow of audio post.
He did not have a whole history with audio post, although he and David Leitch, so they co-directed John Wick 1. Even though it's not credited that way, they are co-directors. There's a little bit of a DJ kerfuffle on that one. That's why it's not credited that as such, but they were both directors. And they both had a company together where they would rehearse, orchestrate, shoot, practice all second unit work on films and be hired out as a company that would do that. They would train all the stunt players. They would coordinate all the stunts ahead of time. They'd go out and shoot it. And sometimes they'd actually go and they'd cut it together. They had that kind of experience in assembling what they were looking to present to the filmmakers they were working for. And from what I understand is on the very first John Wick, they were approached to do all the action beats because they knew Keanu and it seemed like a good fit, but the budget wasn't all that much. And I think they said, well, we might be able to direct the first unit for you instead. And that's how they collaborated together to make John Wick 1. What I remember, they were just enthusiastic for people's ideas and contributions. Even before that, I had worked on quite a few action films. I've worked on a lot of John Woo movies over the course of time. They were a big fan of that, which maybe helped me get the job in the first place. And so it was just what sort of films that they appreciated. They had a whiteboard in the cutting room of things that they liked and didn't like about action genre films. We tried to embrace the ones that they did like. You know, they always were mainly talking about story because they're very big into story arc and the rest. But because of their stunt background, they just wanted things to be interesting and visceral. They are both very accomplished martial artists, trained in everything from cars and guns and horses, you name it. So anything that touched any of those areas, they just wanted to make the most of. And they just wanted it to be, big and bold where it needed to be big and bold. And they just like detail. And they like anything that relates to storytelling within the sound, even if the sound itself is just visceral and that's story enough. But other times it's supposed to embellish the story and protect it.
Well, the thing about John Wick that we all think about immediately is like action, fighting, there's sword play, there's bullets flying everywhere, there's car chases, motorcycle chases. If you go back and rewatch John Wick, the original, the whole first act, it's like a whole different movie. It's a love story, it's about loss, and it's a much quieter film off the start. And then after that first act, all hell breaks loose, and it basically doesn't stop until the end of movie 2, essentially.
On the first one, I mean, that was just the story. You know, again, they're just really story-centric, and they wanted to show this peaceful life that John Wick had that when he left his organization and let it unfold naturally, set up the trauma that takes him on the path for which the film eventually, or the film franchise ultimately gets known for. So they sort of lull us into a sense of, kind of peaceful in his life. It gets disrupted. We get to know the characters and it evolves into action. So it doesn't start into action. And like you said, Tim, the action, once it picks up, carries on through other films too. But it had to be a setup and it had to be indicative of the story that they wanted to tell and the character they wanted to create. So that's why it doesn't start off with a bang, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really effective. The conundrum that is presented by the John Wick series that you might not even have had to think about when working on the first one because might not have known that there's going to be a series at that point. Everything has to keep getting bigger constantly throughout the series. The guns are absolutely massive in movie 1. And then by movie 3, we've got new bullets introduced that can pierce armor that have to sound even bigger. By movie 4, the scope of the film is massive. Like movie 1 all takes place in one city. Movie 4 is taking place all around the world. Andy, do you want to talk about the idea of like how you figure out how to constantly make things bigger, badder, and better?
Visually, you start off with that enhanced shotgun with the big battle at the Continental, which was the armor-piercing shotgun, and then Dragon's Breath in 3, and then it just gets bigger and bigger.
I wanted to jump in and say, we were really talking about the dialogue and sound effects and sound design, but I would say that Tyler Bates made a score for John Wick 1 And he continued to score the rest of the films and create a theme that really links everything together. So that score is really, really important to the overall soundtrack. There's John Wick's theme that if you play it before something happens and you like the franchise, as I think we all do, you know something really fun and exciting and unique is going to happen. And that's just part of the lore that's created in the sound element. It has a lot to do with the score as much as it does with the visceral quality of any of the guns or the weapons.
The music evolves. Like Nicholas and Nathan discovered some really cool stuff. They had some DJs remaster and remix some of their tracks. So the musical scope kind of expanded in 4 from beyond just Tyler stuff. And there's some really cool club drops and the cue that's in the Arc de Triomphe. It's a little more contemporary.
Casey?
Your question was, how does everything get bigger and bigger? By the time I had worked on 4, you were able to see these films before it, and there was something that was new and interesting in each one of those things. So I don't know if it's necessarily something that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's just some new idea that Chad gets his, starts to think about and wants to be a key feature in that movie that we're currently working on, right? So in 4, The Dragon's Breath was the new and interesting thing, along with all the really big, cool story pieces, the world expansion and all that. But, just in terms of the action, and there's also the big Arc Trump chase, which I think is really incredible and kind of one of the coolest action pieces, that I've personally ever seen. So it's just new ideas that need to be sold sonically in an interesting way,
Luke, did you want to add to that?
These guys they've been in action for like their whole lives. So they're constantly creating different ways to set up new fun action experiences. And like as martial artists, as guys who know cars, as, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did that? And when you have something like John Wick 1, that was almost like an independent film as far as like the size and scope, resources they had to make that movie. And now it's continued to grow and expand and have a bigger and bigger fan base. So, naturally they can get a little bit more money and go, okay, now that we have this money, let's see what we can do with this. How much cooler can we make this? And the way sound also has kind of traveled with it is that Chad works a little differently than a lot of other action movie franchises where, most typical things, you got dialogue is king, then music, then sound effects. But in many of the action beats, Chad likes to play dialogue, then effects, then music, because he really wants to sell that whole experience. And that's a big shift from what a lot of other people are doing.
Yeah, he makes it a point to say that. It's like, obviously, I want to hear the story and the words, but he calls it sound design. Sound design comes first, and music supports it where it needs to within an action beat, or if it's, a different kind of scene where it's music forward, that's different. But just because you have an action beat scene, it's never admittedly music forward to start with. Not that music doesn't play a huge role in the films.
To have the music present and audible, but still leaving room for effects to be featured, that's always very tricky.
Yeah. I don't think Andy does it, but it's amazing every time because everything just plays so well together. It's awesome.
Andy, do you feel like you have to reprogram yourself when you get on the stage for a John Wick movie because of that different approach?
Not necessarily, but it is always a challenge because a lot of times if you have motorcycles going and electric guitars, very similar frequency spectrum. So you sort of have to carve and figure out, you have push and pull. We have many, many different stems. So there's a fair amount of latitude in how you can shape the music around the effects. It's always a battle because if the music can just get wiped out if you don't spend a lot of time trying to feature certain things and you've got little holes you can play in.
Casey, what was it like jumping in for movie 4? Did you feel like you were jumping on a moving train or?
No, it felt very, very familiar. I mean, I've known Mark. It was my first time working with Andy. And I think Luke and I can't remember Luke. Have we worked before? We worked together before Wick 4, right?
Yeah, we worked on day shift right before Wick 4.
That's right. That's right. So we were all familiar with one another and I knew the franchise. I think that the biggest sort of hurdle was really getting into Chad's mindset, of like what he would want or what he would expect. Andy and Mark were both really, 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 really great at catching me up quickly. And it was really less like jumping onto a moving train and more like all aboard the party train. It was very fun. It was a great experience.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. We definitely have a good time. I mean, we still have the John Wick 1 liquor cart that travels with us mixed.
So did you bring any new tricks to the game, Casey, to make things sound huge?
There's two things that are kind of happening in parallel with, especially with Wick 4, but also the way that Chad shoots a lot of things is he has this like long lens shot of an action sequence where there's a lot of effects that need to play. They need to be played forward and in front of the music in some way. There was a lot of consideration for spatial treatment and how to kind of play something that feels like it's still impactful, but while it's on the screen, it's set far back, like there's these moving shots that are evolving, and the top shot, as they call it, that's the flamethrower shotgun scene. That one actually full blown tilts up and then goes above us, and we're watching this sort of like almost like a video game thing happening, and it had to be really specific. What I did on that film that I think was a labor of love was because there were so many guns and there were so many bullets, I wound up using objects a lot more than I normally would with effects. The more that I put in objects, there was more space for something that needed to be really big and present. So if I had something that was really specifically placed, area, then whatever was needing to be really big could have the main speakers, and it felt really big, and it kind of created room for all of these things to be playing at once. So I think that was probably that's not necessarily a new trick, but it's definitely a laborious process that I think creates a lot more room for a lot more sound.
Creating room for sound kind of leads me to my next question. Andy, all these fight scenes have nonstop grunts and efforts, and there's huge music. There's massive sound design going on. Do you want to talk about making space for all of those sounds?
A lot of times the battle is just getting them loud enough. But the cool thing about the Wick movies is frequently there's a lot of the production sound in those battles because the stunt guys are grunting, and that organic movement, I think, is important to help marry us to the image on the screen. So there's a lot of production playing with, and in order to get that to play through the huge mass of sound is challenging. Just to get it clean and loud, it's a lot of work.
And that's what sells the fights a lot of the time.
I think so. I always like to hear production sound because I just feel part of the movie when I'm hearing what actually happened on the set.
Is it actually in some ways a bit easier because any kind of background sound is masked by all the other stuff going on?
I always try to get stuff as clean as I can. Just gives me more flexibility because the director says, okay, let's take the music out, and then you're the emperor without clothes. So you have to be, I'm always ready for those contingencies.
Well, like in the stairway fight in 4, it's a complete weave of production, ADR here and there, and it's very seamless. We're fortunate that we recorded our group outside in a practical location. Andy weaves all that together, and we're real specific on editorially what we present. And then he takes it to the next level, makes it seamless of all the elements that go together like that.
Yeah, there's group, and there's Keanu cheated efforts, and then there's production, ADR. So it's a quilt. There's so many different things all together. That's the challenge, is to make it work and feel organic.
And they do a great job dialogue editorially as well, because like those efforts, for example, there's a way to cut both production efforts and group efforts to fighting. It's different. You have to think about, okay, I need the charging effort to be ahead of the impact, the effort of getting hit to be after the impact. You have to make space for that. Just like when you're making space for the whole fight sequence in general, each thing needs to have its own moment in order to work. So you have to be very diligent and precise of how you carve that all out. And that includes the dialogue and the efforts done in the dialogue as well. It's a process that takes time to really cut that stuff together so it all plays precise and very action violence that Wick is. You can't have that be sloppy.
I'm sure most everybody does it this way too, but this might sound, if you're to like listen to individual tracks, everything would sound cut up and cut off. And that's on purpose, obviously, right? And that's what we do. But you put it all together and it creates space for what you are playing. as we all know, it takes a lot of time to orchestrate it to the frame like that on every single thing that's happening.
How does that all come together? Are you taking the dialogue session and the sound effects session and going through them before they hit the stage? Or are you discovering that during the premixes? When are you finding out where all those spaces work?
Well, you do as much as you humanly can possible before it hits the stage. But then even after it hits the stage, you're still continuing to do that because you're introducing score, music, song, whatever it might happen to be, and just how things land amongst the music and the space that it takes up or needs to be freed up for, really. I think conceptually, everybody on this Zoom and others, spend a lot of time trying to be really, really specific, going through things and adding sort of like one layer at a time. Like, okay, well, now that's a conflict. So what's the conflict? What do we take out editorially to create a space? Then, of course, you get it to the stage and you continue to do that because the speakers are different and the volume that you're playing is different. Sounds linger a little bit more than they would in a mid or near field environment. So you want to take that into account.
I guess what I'm asking is when the dialogue editor is cutting their dialogue session, they're normally not hearing the sound effects at that point. Where is in the stage does it all come together for the first time and get those tweaks?
I think it's kind of a mix. Like we often share things together. You might say, hey, as soon as you got a cut of that reel, send me a bounce, just so we can all have the material together and work against the most recent and relevant stuff. It's something that we all do together as a team. We share our progress so that way we can, collectively have as much information as possible to move forward with and appropriately edit. That's the beauty of it is the fact that, one, it's experience of us all working together, but then two, because you get a little bit of shorthand, especially with something like this, you get comfortable working in this style, but then also being able to share our work together so it all play together better.
And we're all working multidimensionally too, because everyone's in front of Pro Tools, and so we've got up, down, brighter, quieter, verby, left, right, sooner, later. So we've all got instant manipulation of all those dimensions.
And a little bit of hats off too to the picture editors on the whole series. They're very, very cognizant of sound and how it plays and how it interacts and how it times out. So they're not stacking things together that might not otherwise play. I mean, yes, that has to be taken further, but they really start the process when they're cutting the picture and pacing the picture, orchestrating things that work together. So that process starts there. Our contribution in post sound, which is fabulous, but it starts with the picture editorial. And it's really a baseline in a lot of areas that they create. And so the timing that you're talking about, it really begins there. And now it's just our job to take it further as we can.
Casey, did you have something to add?
It's a multi-tiered process of going through material, starting with editorial, and then from the moment that Andy and I combine our pre-dubs and go up together, with how much is going on in these films, it's really a multi-layered, multi-efforted process to get it to sound as clean as possible so that everything is feeling natural and you don't feel these cutoffs that Mark is talking about. Because we definitely, if you look at some of our automation, it's just full square, breaks in the automation, but it's all to be presented in the most impactful and clean and modern way of experiencing an action film.
So, Andy, what's the communication between the mixing team and the editorial team leading up to the premixes? Are you just stepping into it cold, or are they showing you things ahead of time? Or
generally, dialogue. The tracks will just show up on the stage, and the editor will be with me, and we'll just go through it. I'm sure the effects side, because Casey's involved in the editorial, and Mark. You are involved with the tracks far before it reaches a stage.
The process goes, as you know, we temp the films. John Wick 4, interestingly enough, never temped on a stage. It was always done in the Avid. But we would review it on the stage and offer up suggestions on what they could do in the Avid to help even improve the sonic quality. Even if that wouldn't have happened, the fact that you temp mix films, when Andy would talk about scenes like, I think I can fix that, or no, you should probably loop that. So we're getting that kind of input as far as content goes all along the way. And with that information, with things that he would like, he's really giving us a wish list, really. Even if it's not really myopic on every single thing, it's just kind of generally like, yeah, that seems going to be fine. That line, not good. So as time goes on, we can address that specifically.
So you're sending Andy lines ahead of time. Let us know if you think we should loop this.
I think it's more like in the temp mixes themselves.
Okay.
Because, temp mixes with limited time, you do what you can, and then you get some insight on what you're going to need to do differently in the future. And part of that is what dialogue can be fixed or not fixed.
I want to tell you all about a really cool mic that I've been using a lot lately in my own work. It's called the O-Mini, and it's a miniature omnidirectional mic with a really neutral frequency response. I recently went to a frozen pond to record some skating sounds. When you record skating in an actual rink, you quickly find out that they are extremely reverberant. So I wanted to record outdoors where there's no walls for the sounds to bounce off of. So I grabbed my pair of O-Minis and I taped them to my legs just above my skates, and I hit the ice. The O-Minis handled the cold without issue, and I got the sounds I was after. There are a couple cool things about this mic that drew me to it. First up, each mic is handmade by Chris Trevino, a practicing field recordist and a really engaged member of the sound community. He puts a lot of work into making and testing each mic to ensure they live up to his high standards. Secondly, they are ultrasonic capable, which makes manipulating my recordings with them a lot of fun. I have 2 O-Minis personally, and they have been great to work with. In addition to the skating sounds, I've recorded other things like footsteps in snow, paper foley, and lots more. Maybe my favorite things about the O-Minis is the price. They are extremely affordable. At $150 American for a stereo match pair, they offer a lot of value. I suggest you give them a try. At this price, you really can't go wrong. To learn more, head to chrisatrevino.com or click on the link in the description of this episode in your podcast app. Luke, do you want to talk about how you build a massive gun sound?
I'm going to give a big shout out to Alan Rankin because he's
Here.
he's the
Here.
really the genius behind the gun sound of John Wick. But it's really done in layers, and it's all about how you want kind of the gun to play and shape out. I think most of us in the sound community, we know about our hero guns, and where our hero gun always wants to sound kind of more powerful and impactful than the bad guy guns. So there's that element to it where what's going on is usually the actual gun that's being shot is being used, but there's also other layers that add, in this case with John Wick, often it's precision. So you have things that are, even if it's not a silencer gun, there's almost a silencer sound that has that kind of sharp attack to it that is really neat. And then, you have these big shotguns that often Alan has designed where he's using like cannons within the sound of the shotgun itself. Even like tonal things that are just long and huge and have bottom end weight, kind of like can make your chest rumble a little bit. So they're multi-layered guns, and the effectiveness of this is also when you have a big gunfight, constant gunshots over and over and over. When you have those various layers, including the mechanism, the dry fire, the shell ejection, the bullet droppings, what you can do is you can constantly raise, lower, mute, pitch change these layers all separately, so you can quickly make the gun both sound the same but sound different for every single shot. Suddenly, the perspective of the gun, you can quickly change the perspective of the gun as well. So it's a big process involving a lot of layers, but spending the time to just make the gun itself sound great, and then taking that element and then reusing it and making those slight modifications throughout the whole thing. It's a really cool and different process.
One thing that Alan does that I'm not sure if this is common in the world of people that cut guns a lot. First thing I noticed that was different with Alan's guns, first off, they sounded great. But the thing that was really interesting is that he does this thing where and maybe this is common again, but I was very impressed with this. It's a very simple trick, but it's really cool where he advances the LFE element of the gun like half of a frame from the actual gunshot. It gives this feeling of like deep low end compression and then release when the gunshot happens, it almost makes room for the low end in the gun in a way that makes the gun more impactful than having all of these elements all layered directly on top of each other. It gives like this impact compression boom before the gunshot. And it's really, really cool. I think if you solo one of his guns, you just have this like, it almost pushes you back in your seat before the gun fires. It's really interesting.
It's more in sync with the dry fire. And then the actual explode of the gun comes after that.
It almost like boom sucks and then bam, it's really cool.
Tim, you asked about the evolution of things. Well, Alan, who's done the guns on all the John Wick movies from 1 through 4, what he does is evolve too. I mean, he finds different compression schemes that he wants to use. I mean, I think it was on 2 or 3 that introduced like the API 2500, which has been pretty cool. Some preset that he's got only on some of the elements. And, we've always wanted kind of like this tighter, but with more low frequency energy sound. And over the course of time, that's where it's evolved to. I don't think any of us are really fans of those kind of like those washy 1970s gunshots, which is easy to get to without a lot of care and attention. So, and he has definitely found his secret sauce in evolving them so they get bigger and tighter along the way.
And different and more interesting. I don't know how he does it. I mean, for doing this so many times over and over, you never hear the same gun twice.
So is there a sound effects library for John Wick? You're talking about how everything's evolving and stuff. Are there any gunshots that were first designed in movie 1 that were in movie 4 or in Ballerina or something like that?
Yes, but they're not always used like that. Usually it's actually used for the picture department. We've built these libraries and it gives them something that they can then use. That being said, I've built a pretty considerable fight library. I've libraried so many different things, including surfaces and grabs and body impacts and all kinds of like different fabrics, leather, good heavy hard cloths, other kinds of stuff. So I've definitely built not just this movie, but a lot of other things I've worked on, but a giant fight library. But certainly Wick has been a part of me building such a big library. And then it absolutely helps when you're working on the next thing.
Hey, Luke, you built an awesome contact patch of all these various gunshots, gun hits, bullet hits for 3, which still used to this day in various ways.
I have a giant bullet library that I built off of it that's incredibly effective. And I won't even just necessarily have to open up contact. I'll just be like, as I'm going through and like hearing, oh, it needs this, it needs that. I'm like, oh, it just needs that really good bullet impacting a mid-range concrete with a good rubble. I know exactly where to pull it from.
Mm-hmm.
When are you adding them to the library? Are you able to do it while you're cutting the movie, or when your movie's done, do you go back to your sessions and build the library out of it?
It's a little bit of both. Hopefully, if I'm being smart about it, I'm labeling things as I'm doing it. That's not always the case. My mind works a little bit differently when I'm cutting stuff, like in how I build my library. I'm not the greatest at putting metadata into everything or using acronyms and stuff like that. I'm usually much more of I remember this sound that I made in this reel at this time. I have that kind of almost photographic memory of exactly what I did when I'm pulling things. So then I end up kind of building libraries based off of that. But that I've built a side fight session library. I've built a gun session library off of that kind of stuff. So I also have like a session that's like an hour long of different things that I know to pull from, where it's like I can open it up and be like, oh, I'm going to pull these elements based upon this scene that I'm working on right now, and I'll import those and at least use them as a starting place for my build. Yeah.
And what about dialogue library? Like, is Keanu coming in and doing grunts
We
and
do
impacts?
have Keanu effort library.
Yeah, funny you should mention that, because we've been looking for the KR effort library for Ballerina and have yet to quite find it, but we're looking because it exists somewhere.
It's awesome.
But yes, there are those things that are built up because it's good. I mean, there's some group things from Wick 4. They're like, oh man, the guy falling down the stairs. Let's use it in this for this instant because it's just so good.
I believe, Mark, you mentioned earlier that you did loop group outside for the stair fight scene?
Yeah, Wick 4, we did all of our group, or the majority of our group anyway, up at John Ross's place, for those that might be familiar, because it provided all the locations we would need, both inside, outside, different kinds of reflective surfaces and what have you. So it was a pretty fun times. The quick way that worked is we'd use the main room as a one big ADR stage, and it worked great. An actor would come in and do whatever their piece was. It could have been an effort, it could have been a fight scene, whatever. We'd perfect it, have it, and it's like, okay. And they would go outside to one of two pre-established recording stations. They would like hold up their cue, like, I'm cue 2004, take 7. And they would recreate what they just did and was approved on the inside. We'd go outside and do that, and then that would hopefully be the one that we use in the film. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, that is what we use. But we always have the cleaner version to fall back on if we really like something and, it got contaminated some way in the real world. The Arc de Triomphe scene, everybody amongst the cars, because everybody parked in one big little long driveway. They all acted and did all that in amongst the cars. So with boom mics, we're recording all sorts of takes of what they did. And it sounds nice. Sounds nice. It sounds real.
There are lots of franchises where there's, 4, 8 movies or whatever, and each one has a different sound team working on it. How did you build the relationship with the director, with the producers, so that they kept coming back to you?
If we only knew. I guess didn't piss them off too much. They appreciate our enthusiasm and willingness to do something different every time. It really helps that we'll use Chad as an example since he's done 1 through 4. He is very, let's say, sound design forward, and he loves his music cues. I mean, the really great Tyler music cues. And so we all get that. It's worked out really, really well. Like anybody you work with, you get a working vernacular. You don't have to say every single thing, given a situation, what you might start with. Not that you're going to stick with it, but your starting point without having to come up with a baseline. So I think that helped us stay on these movies for 4 of them and kind of 4.5 with Ballerina. So,
Andy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, he's not a super minutia note guy. So, we do our pass and he comes in, he goes, I need that gun to go thwack. He'll act out the sound. Mm-hmm. And,
totally.
It's always fun. But, we're usually on the same page very quickly. So there's not a lot of, he doesn't mess around and deconstruct, and it's been really pleasurable.
Yeah, he'll say things like, "You've been hit by a charging bull." Like, no. He goes, "Well, pretend like you have, because that's what I want right here." Like, okay.
It's that kind of shorthand, I think, that keeps the relationship alive.
Yeah. And he likes to make fun of us. And I think we're good at that.
But he also likes to hang out with us. He brings booze to the stage and hangs out on a Saturday every now and then, He
starts off by going to visual effects, and he's really starts off by being frustrated and pissed off, comes in, he's all upset about that. And it's almost like we've got this calming effect on him. So we're like the post-production masseuse or something like that. I don't know. But you do that enough, and he's going to want to come back for more.
As the movies evolve, the fight sequences get longer. And as we all know, in a fight sequence, if everything's at 100, all of a sudden becomes 50%. You can't have everything all the time. In these long fight sequences, how do you go about finding moments for breaks? Luke, do you want to think about that?
Kind of goes back to what we were talking about before as far as creating space. The way they've set up a lot of these shots, they do such incredible choreography that it's not like this quick cutty stuff. And sometimes that quick cutty stuff can lead to you having to throw more sound at it and kind of throw it all over the place. So it starts off big and you've got nowhere to go with it. But based upon how they've choreographed it, they have these beautiful long shots of just incredible choreography that you can make feel diegetic in the scene. And you can get it to play natural. This stuff is very hyper-realized, but a lot of the hyper-realization that we're doing is pushed forward with the guns, sometimes some of the weapons, and then like big, gory headshots or knife stabs. But that stuff in between, all that fighting, the grappling, the little knife stuff, the moving around inside the environment, we make that play really diegetic within the scene, which keeps that level down until we go big with those big, huge, beautiful things that he wants to do, where he wants you to feel like you got hit by a bull. It's really well crafted and thought out by Chad and the picture team themselves based upon how we're able to build these things. They kind of really think, based upon how he's crafted it, it makes it easier to play that way.
Sometimes when you've got like cut and shaky cam, you have to use sound to explain what the hell's going on. visually, we know what's going on because they're wide shots and you see all the action. So the onus is not on us to help to explain to the audience what's happening. We're enhancing what's happening.
Yeah, remember how I said that Chad really appreciates ballet? Well, think of the action scenes are like ballets. It's like a dance. It's just with different things going on in that dance, but it is like a dance.
When we're working through the projects, I think there's a lot of times that we're, on the console muting effects, muting music, in moments where we feel like there's a possibility to give some sort of a palate cleanse and taking a beat. For instance, in the club in 4, after he gets knocked off the top balcony and hits the ground, there was a lot of sound still playing in those moments. We take the moments to kind of stop and think, like, can we get rid of everything here for a second to give everybody a beat before we get back into the really big action sequences? Find our moments, I think, to give everybody a little bit of a break whenever we can. And it feels stylistically interesting to the film.
Yeah, I'd say the music is really orchestrated well in this movie, which for those of us doing the other 2 aspects of the soundtrack provides opportunities, where you can come and go and make changes. And Andy found amazing ways to do that in Wick 4, all of them, but Wick 4 is the freshest in my mind. And that just helps give it a lot of variety. So nothing's ever monotonous at all in these movies, even though they're long. They got long fight sequences and all that goes with it.
Do you have anything to add, Andy?
That club scene in particular was super fun because, we had a lot of areas where the club music was playing as score, then it would become source playing as reverberant club music. And then when John Wick is in his altered state, everything gets filtered out and it's just a rumble and slowly transitioning back. And there's about 8 or 10 musical transitions through that scene. It was super fun.
Yeah, it's super effective too.
Yeah, well, it's exemplified by the fact that every time Chad brought a visitor on the stage, he wanted to play Reel 5, which is the club scene. So we probably played that 12 times, in the course of the mix. Stop everything we're doing, put up Reel 5, play that for Chad and whoever the guest is, and then go back to what we were doing.
You're doing something right when they want to keep seeing it over and over again. That's good.
Yeah. And so maybe that's why he comes back for more, Tim.
There you go.
It only took one reel of a club scene, and he's back.
Thank you very much for talking to me today. The John Wick film, I think, is one of the most influential franchises, I guess we'll call it. I have to be honest, the first time when I went and saw John Wick, the original one in the theater, I didn't know what I was getting into, and it was awesome, and it blew my mind. And then, as we've said, each movie gets bigger, takes a big step forward on each one. So I'm really looking forward to hearing, hearing Ballerina. So thanks a lot for talking to me today, and hopefully we can have you all back on again sometime soon.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sound Ideas annual memberships put Sound Ideas' full range of over 600,000 sound effects, music tracks, and production elements at your fingertips. With 3 tiers to choose from based on your sound design needs. The Creator's Access Plan is perfect for the independent creator working on a smaller scale, looking for high-quality sound options at a great price. With up to 100 downloads, you'll enjoy significant savings compared to buying individual sounds. And you'll have free reign over Sound Ideas' extensive collection. Use the promo code TONEBENDERS50 for 50% off any Sound Ideas annual membership to amplify your future productions. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues. Or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.